She never believed in love at first sight until she met him. It wasn't just the way he looked at her, like she was the only one in the world, but the way he listened, as if every word she spoke held the weight of the universe. From the very first conversation, there was something undeniable, a pull neither of them could ignore. Late-night calls turned into sunrise coffee dates, whispered promises into shared dreams. He made love feel effortless, like a rhythm she had always known but never danced to before. He would tuck strands of hair behind her ear, kiss her forehead absent-mindedly, send her texts that made her blush even when no one was watching. Forever, he'd say, "I've never been more sure of anything." And she believed him. Every little thing about him became home. The scent of his cologne on her sweater, the way he always held her hand while driving, the way his voice softened when he said her name. She kept every note he ever wrote her, folded carefully in the pages of a book she never finished. Not because she forgot, but because happiness felt like something she didn't need to rush through. Their love was the kind people wrote about, the kind that made the world envious. Strangers would glance at them, smiling, as if they, too, could feel the warmth between them. It was perfect. Until, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it wasn't. There were moments, small, fleeting, that didn't quite make sense. A distracted look in his eyes, an unanswered text, a missed call he never mentioned. But love makes excuses. Love convinces you that doubt is just fear whispering lies. So she ignored it, because what they had was real, wasn't it? Then one night, as they lay under a sky full of stars, he pulled her close, his arms around her like a shield against the world. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. And she smiled, pressing her face into his chest, inhaling the scent of the man she had built her heart around. She didn't know it then, but that would be the last time those words felt true. Something felt different. She couldn't explain it, not in words, but it was there, a quiet shift in the air between them. His touch wasn't as lingering, his laughter wasn't as full. He still said all the right things, but there was a hesitation now, a slight delay before the "I love you" that never used to be there. At first, she convinced herself it was nothing. People change, routines settle. Maybe he was just tired. But then came the small lies, the little things that didn't add up. A meeting that ran late, but his shirt smelled like a perfume she never wore. A missed call, followed by a message that felt too carefully crafted. He was there, but not really. Like a ghost of the man she once knew. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that the love they built was unshakable. But doubt has a way of creeping in, slipping through the cracks of certainty. When he was near, she felt the weight of unspoken words pressing between them. When he was away, her mind raced, filling the silence with questions she was too afraid to ask. One night, she reached for his phone out of habit. It was locked. It never used to be. She laughed it off, but inside, something twisted. The next morning, he left for work, forgetting it on the nightstand. It lit up once, then twice. A name she didn't recognize. A message that disappeared before she could read it. Her heart pounded, but she did nothing. Not yet. She told herself she was being paranoid, that love deserved the benefit of the doubt. But deep down, she knew love shouldn't feel like this. Love shouldn't make you question your own sanity. Days passed, and the space between them grew. He stopped noticing the way she lingered at the door when he left. He no longer reached for her hand absent-mindedly. He was slipping away, and she didn't know how to hold on to someone who no longer wanted to stay. The worst part wasn't the distance. It was the moments when he looked at her and smiled like nothing had changed. As if he wasn't slowly unraveling everything they had built. As if he wasn't hiding something behind the warmth in his eyes. And maybe that was the real betrayal, not just the possibility of someone else, but the way he let her believe in a love that was already breaking. The truth never comes softly. It crashes, it shatters, it leaves you breathless in a way love never could. She hadn't meant to find out like this. Maybe she hadn't wanted to find out at all. But fate has a cruel way of forcing reality into the hands of those too blind to see it. And there it was, undeniable, inescapable. A message that didn't disappear this time. A name she now knew too well. A meeting place. a time. Her heart didn't break in that moment. No, it held on, desperate for an explanation, a reason that would make it all make sense. She wasn't ready to grieve something she had spent so long believing in. So she went. Not because she wanted to catch him, but because she needed to prove herself wrong. But she wasn't wrong. He was there, standing too close to someone else, his touch too familiar, his smile too real. There was no hesitation in the way he looked at her, no guilt in the way he leaned in. He wasn't thinking of the woman who had spent nights tracing the lines of his face, memorizing the way he breathed next to her. He wasn't thinking of her at all. She could have screamed. She could have cried. But instead, she just stood there, watching the love she had fought for slip through her fingers like it had never been real to begin with. When he finally noticed her, his face shifted, not with remorse, not with shame, but with something closer to inconvenience. Like she was an interruption to a life he had already moved on from. And that was the moment it truly broke. She didn't need to ask why. The answer was right in front of her, woven into the way he didn't even try to explain. There was no grand confession, no desperate apology. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. She turned away before he could say anything, before he could make it worse with words that would mean nothing now. Love had already left the room. There was nothing left to save. The walk home felt longer than ever. Every step was a reminder that she had been living in a love story only she believed in. But the pain didn't come in waves. It settled in her bones, cold and unshakable. She had spent so much time fearing this moment, but now that it was here, it wasn't as terrifying as she had imagined. It was just empty. And maybe that was the worst part. Not the betrayal, not the lies, but the quiet realization that he had let go long before she had. The first night without him was silent. Too silent. No missed calls, no goodnight texts, no familiar warmth beside her. Just the sound of her own breathing in a room that suddenly felt too big. She thought the pain would come in tears, but instead, it settled like a weight in her chest, heavy and unmoving. She didn't cry. Not at first. She just sat there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how love could vanish so easily, how someone who promised forever could leave like it meant nothing. The days blurred together. People told her to be angry, to hate him, to move on. But anger felt too exhausting, and moving on wasn't as simple as just deciding to. So she did what she could. She got up. She went through the motions. She pretended the world hadn't just collapsed around her. But grief has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. A song on the radio. A scent in the air. A memory slipping through the cracks of her carefully built walls. And suddenly, she was back in the moments she swore she had left behind. Still, she refused to break. So she filled the silence with new things. Books she had never read, places she had never been, conversations with people who didn't look at her with pity in their eyes. She learned to laugh again, not because she had forgotten, but because life refused to wait for her heartbreak to heal. And slowly, she began to understand. Losing him wasn't the tragedy she once thought it was. The real loss had been the pieces of herself she had given away, the parts of her that had bent and twisted just to fit into the shape of his love. So she took them back, one by one. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need closure. She didn't need him to apologize or regret or suddenly realize what he had lost. She just needed to remember who she was before him and who she could be after. And one day, without even realizing it, she woke up and the weight was gone. The memories were still there, but they didn't sting anymore. The love had faded, but it hadn't ruined her. She was still here, still standing, still breathing. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything.